Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
Our HOA president had been ruling the neighborhood like her own little fiefdom for years. She didn't just enforce the rules, she weaponized them. People whispered about how she seemed to have favorites. Her friends' overgrown lawns and garish holiday displays never got letters, but heaven help you if your trash can lingered by the curb for an extra hour. My family had been lucky to fly under her radar, but some of our neighbors weren't so fortunate. The stories were endless. Fines for imaginary violations, threatening emails, and humiliating call-outs during board meetings. It was a mess. So when the opportunity arose to remove her, it wasn't just a glimmer of hope, it felt like a necessity. Enough was enough. We weren't her subjects, and this wasn't her kingdom. Following the bylaws to the letter, we gathered signatures for a petition, knowing we'd need at least 10% of homeowners to sign on to force a vote. Not only did we hit that number, but we nearly tripled it. We submitted the petition to the board and waited, and waited, and waited. 30 days passed, and we didn't hear a single word. Meanwhile, it was clear she knew about the petition. Suddenly, my neighbor Judy, who had been one of the first to sign, received a notice about her garden being out of compliance. Judy has an immaculate yard, practically Pinterest-worthy, but now she was being told her tulips were encroaching on common areas. Another neighbor, Steve, got a violation letter for parking his car on the street overnight, a rule that had never been enforced in the 7 years I'd lived there. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. She was retaliating against anyone she thought was against her. Then came the Facebook posts, and things escalated from ridiculous to outright surreal. The neighborhood group, which she controlled like a hawk, morphed into her personal echo chamber and battleground. Every day she posted cryptic, melodramatic messages about traitors and cowards who don't care about our community. She never named names, but everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. Each post seemed designed to stir the pot, rile up her loyal supporters, and intimidate anyone who dared question her. The comments section under her posts was a circus. A handful of residents showered her with praise, calling her a strong leader and the only one brave enough to stand up for the HOA. They clung to every word, like she was some kind of neighborhood savior. On the other hand, people fed up with her antics fired back, demanding she respect the removal vote and step down. "You're embarrassing yourself," one person wrote. "We followed the bylaws. You lost. Just leave." Another added, "Stop dividing this community. It's not your personal kingdom." The tension was so thick you could practically feel it through the screen. But here's where it got truly infuriating. Anyone who criticized her, even politely, vanished from the group. One day they'd be debating in the comments, and the next their profile would be gone. At first people thought it was just coincidence or a technical glitch, but it quickly became clear she was banning them. No warnings, no explanations, just an instant boot. It didn't matter if they'd been members of the group for years or had contributed meaningful discussions in the past. If you didn't toe her line, you were out. The group turned into a curated fan club, with only her supporters and a few nervous lurkers left. People started sharing screenshots and private messages to show what was happening, creating a sort of underground resistance. It felt like a bad reality show, complete with alliances, betrayals, and dramatic exits. Except this wasn't entertainment. It was our community being torn apart post by post. After the 30 days of silence from the board, we invoked the bylaws to schedule the vote ourselves. We hired a neutral third party, a retired judge from the area, to oversee the meeting and ensure fairness. That's when the real chaos began. The president and her husband went door to door, demanding to see the petition we had submitted. They claimed they had the right to know who signed it, even though the bylaws said otherwise. People told us about heated confrontations on their porches, with her husband shouting about loyalty and betrayal. It was absurd. When the day of the vote finally arrived, tensions were through the roof, but we were ready. Nearly a quarter of the neighborhood showed up in person, a testament to how fed up everyone was with the situation. For those who couldn't attend, proxies came pouring in. The air buzzed with quiet determination as people filed into the meeting space, murmuring about how long this fight had dragged on. The retired judge we hired to oversee the process brought a calm, no-nonsense professionalism to the proceedings. His steady demeanor should have set the tone for a respectful meeting, but it seemed to do the exact opposite for her. From the moment the meeting started, she was on edge, muttering under her breath and shooting daggers at anyone who dared look her way. Every time the judge tried to move the agenda forward, she interrupted, claiming the process was illegal and accusing him of being biased. "I don't know where you dug this guy up, but he clearly has no authority here," she snapped at one point, her voice trembling with anger. The judge, unflappable, simply reminded her of the bylaws and urged her to let the meeting continue. That only made her more irate. She began pacing, shaking her head and muttering things like, "This is a sham," loud enough for the entire room to hear. When it was finally her turn to speak, the room went silent, everyone waiting to hear what she'd say. But instead of addressing the group or defending her actions, she just sat there, folding her arms tightly across her chest and glaring at us like a petulant child in a timeout. "I don't need to dignify this farce with a response," she finally spat, refusing to say another word. The tension was suffocating as we moved forward without her participation. It was like she thought her refusal to engage would somehow invalidate the vote. But instead of making her look strong or defiant, it just made her look like someone who'd lost control. Not just of the HOA, but of herself. The vote wasn't even close. 74% of voters wanted her out. When the final numbers were announced, the room erupted in a wave of relief and celebration. People clapped loudly, some even standing to applaud. A few neighbors cheered like they were at a sports event, shouting things like, "It's about time," and finally some justice. A couple of the more emotional attendees hugged each other, tears of relief in their eyes. For many of us, it wasn't just about removing her. It was about reclaiming a sense of community that had been trampled under her reign. For the first time in years, it felt like we had a chance to move forward. The mood in the room was electric, filled with hope and a sense of accomplishment. Conversations buzzed as people talked about what we could do next. Maybe repair the playground, address long-ignored maintenance issues, or just finally enjoy a board that listened to its members. It was like a weight had been lifted, and everyone could finally breathe again. But of course it wasn't that simple. Even as the celebration tarried on, there was an undercurrent of unease. She sat there in her chair, rigid and stone-faced, refusing to even acknowledge the result. Her supporters, few as they were, whispered amongst themselves, shooting us glares like we'd just committed some great injustice. The management agency representatives exchanged quiet glances, clearly unsure of what to do now that their favorite board president had been decisively rejected. It didn't take long for that unease to turn into a full-blown reality check. She wasn't going to go quietly. That much was obvious. The way she glared at us, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, was a clear message. This fight was far from over. The next morning, she sent an email to the entire community, declaring the vote invalid. She claimed she hadn't been given a fair chance to defend herself, conveniently ignoring how she had sabotaged the process at every turn. And since she was the management company's main contact, they sided with her. Emails to the company went unanswered or received curt responses stating that they would defer to the board president on the matter. What made it worse was that the rest of the board didn't even want her there anymore. The vice president and treasurer both quit in protest within days of the vote. The remaining members tried to push for her removal again, but every effort was blocked by the management company, which insisted on her authority. It was a complete power grab, and it worked. Then came the announcement, delivered with the smug confidence of someone who thought they'd just pulled the ultimate power move. There would be a second vote, this time officially sanctioned by the management company. The president, still clinging to her position like a lifeline, made the declaration as though it was the most logical next step. She claimed the previous vote was invalid, dismissed the retired judge's impartiality, and insisted that this new process was the only one that would count. The most infuriating part, she appointed herself to oversee the entire thing. The same person who had been voted out by an overwhelming majority was now putting herself in charge of the redo. She promised a fair and transparent process, but no one in the room believed her for a second. How could we, when her definition of fairness seemed to hinge on her staying in power no matter what? Her announcement felt like a slap in the face to everyone who had worked so hard to follow the rules and finally bring about change. People started whispering in disbelief, some outright groaning or shaking their heads. One neighbor, visibly furious, stood up and said, "You can't be serious. You've already been removed. How can you oversee your own vote?" Her supporters clapped for her, as she dismissed the comment with a wave of her hand, saying, "We'll follow the rules this time, not the ones you all made up." The room devolved into chaos, with people arguing over the legitimacy of the new vote and the blatant conflict of interest. But she just stood there, arms crossed, basking in the uproar as if she'd already won. It didn't matter what anyone said or how clearly the community had spoken before. She was determined to stay, no matter how many rules she had to twist to make it happen. I couldn't believe the audacity. She had obstructed the process, harassed homeowners, and ignored the clear will of the community, and now she was being rewarded for it. Meanwhile, the rest of us were left scrambling to figure out what to do next. Some neighbors started talking about legal action, but the cost was daunting, and no one could agree on the best approach. The neighborhood felt like a war zone. People were divided into factions, those who supported her, those who wanted her gone, and those who just wanted the drama to end. The Facebook group was an endless stream of arguments, accusations, and memes. Someone even started an anonymous blog, detailing every move she made, complete with screenshots and snarky commentary. Meanwhile, enforcement of the rules became more erratic. One week, someone would get a fine for having a political sign in their yard. The next week, her friend down the street would have a giant banner up with no consequences. People started installing cameras, not just for security but to gather evidence. It felt like living under surveillance, but instead of protecting us, it was about proving we weren't crazy. As the date for the second vote approached, tensions hit a boiling point. Signs went up all over the neighborhood, some calling for her removal, others declaring support for her. One night, someone tore down all the anti-president signs on my street. The next morning, I found one of them crumpled up and stuffed into my mailbox. It wasn't even subtle. On the night of the second vote, she strutted into the clubhouse like she owned the place. The management company had sent their own representative to ensure transparency, but it was obvious whose side they were on. The president spoke for nearly an hour, blaming everyone but herself for the division in the community. When people tried to question her, she brushed them off or accused them of being part of a smear campaign. The vote went exactly as expected. With her running the show, there was no chance of a fair outcome. She declared herself the victor, and announced that she would remain as president to restore order to the community. Walking home that night, I felt a mix of anger and exhaustion. We had followed every rule, done everything by the book, and it hadn't mattered. She had won, not because she was right, but because she was ruthless. And now we were stuck with her, her management company allies, and her reign of chaos. The neighborhood is quieter now, but it's not peace, it's resignation. People keep their heads down, trying not to draw her attention. A few families have already put their houses up for sale, unwilling to live under her rule any longer. I can't blame them. If I could, I'd probably do the same. But for now, all I can do is wait and hope that someday, somehow, this nightmare ends. Sounds like a good reason to let it continue. You get a case against the HOA that may pay out quite well. You get to not just remove that person from the board, but hopefully get them a criminal conviction that may prevent them serving on other boards or being re-elected. They may have to serve some time which removes them from the community. It gives you cause to have documents and private communications reviewed if it becomes a criminal case or sufficient civil, which can expose hidden supporters and actors who are manipulating or damaging the community in other ways. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. We had a similar story with an HOA president who was running the board like it was her own. People hated her and the management company, so we turned over the board fair and square with new faces and replaced the property manager. Though the management company was corrupt, but realized that the issues was not just with the board president, but the assigned property manager was leading us down a dark path. We are looking to give our management company a second chance. I say all that to say the property manager and property management company that assigned them has tons of skin in the game too, and should be held accountable. A fraud conviction would be a criminal complaint, which is why it would prevent them from sitting on another board. It would be outside their duties on the HOA, and any fines would be on the individual. Depending on the fraud, a subsequent civil suit for money damages could include the HOA, in which case you'd potentially be correct, at least in part.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.